Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing David860 in a 15 plus 10 game on chess.com. It's another climbing the rating ladder video. Okay, let's play a Sicilian. And the b3 Sicilian. All right, you don't face this too often. So black can play a number of moves against this. I'm going to play b6. Pretty uncommon reply, but looking to fianchetto my bishop as well and attack this pawn on e4. Okay, and bishop c4. So pressure against f7 immediately, but I don't see anything that indicates I don't need to or don't want to play bishop b7. Queen f3, queen h5, I can deal with those moves, no sweat. So let's go ahead and complete the fianchetto. And knight c3. And now I think I'm just going to play e6 and block the scope of this bishop. With knight c3, white is blocking their own bishop if they complete the fianchetto. And I can think about playing a quick d5 if I like. Could do it here, but I think I'm going to hold it in reserve and maybe build the position. Knight c6 comes to mind. I could play knight f6 and try to draw this pawn forward. That may actually be interesting because knight f6, if e5, I could take on g2, although I'm not 100% sure how the capture on f6, take on f1 turns out. That looks kind of sharp, like my bishop could get trapped. f3, there's also, with this bishop lurking, maybe some problems on f7. So, yeah, knight c6, certainly a candidate. d6, also a candidate. I actually kind of like d6, because maybe then I can play knight f6 on the next move. Let's do that. d6, looking to play knight f6 without having to worry about e5. Pretty conducive to a lot of structures that black likes to enter into in the Sicilian. Pawns right side by side, e6, d6, controlling all this territory. And queen e2 is the answer. Okay, so this seems to indicate my opponent's going to castle queenside. I'm still going to go ahead and play knight f6. And on castle's queenside, I think I'll play knight c6. Just looking to develop modestly. Knight c6, bishop e7, castle. Yeah, let's play knight c6 here, just in case white plays d4. So we can dissuade that move. I can get my knight and my pawn pointed at the d4 square. Pretty unusual position for an open Sicilian. Or anti-Sicilian, I should say, that is looking like it may become an open Sicilian if white plays d4. All right, I'm going to play bishop e7. And h4. Okay, so looks to me like white has in mind the pawn storm if I castle short. That being said, though, I don't know if that's going to dissuade me from castling short. I could play a6 here. That's one move I kind of like the looks of, intending to follow with b5. Still haven't completely ruled out d5, especially now that I played bishop e7. That may be a good move as well. Could castle, but yeah, white is ready to continue pushing. h5 or maybe g4. d5 looks kind of nice, although I would feel better about d5 if, after a trade of pawns, let's say, in bishop b5, knight e5 wasn't on the way, or my king was already castled safely and I didn't have to worry about knight e5 with the pin. So maybe a6. I think a6 is pretty standard looking here. White might play a4 just out of reflex, trying to stop b5, and then I can play d5, I think, pretty favorably here. Yeah, so it looks like this may happen. Yeah, I have d5 guarded enough times. And even though I'm opening the e-file and my king is sitting right here, the bishop is backed up. I'm going to be gaining time by hitting his bishop. I think I like it. I'm going to do it. My middle name is actually David, so I can identify with this player. Also, my brother's name is David. My parents just really like the name David. Okay, let's take back. I did briefly look at knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes g7, but I don't feel it should be enough compensation. Rook g8. So I'm thinking if this bishop gets driven back to d3, that gives me some nice options. I may play pawn to d4 and just totally shut out this dark square bishop. I I may just castle and maintain the tension. I think white should play bishop d3. I don't see a whole lot of other good moves. Kind of leaning towards playing d4 if white does that. d4, knight e4, maybe knight d5 at that point. Avoid a trade of knights. Ooh, and white really wants to kill me here. All right, I got to take that. And I assume they're going to take here, but as I was saying, after rook g8, I didn't see a great follow-up for white. Just double checking. I don't have a lot to think about here. I think rook g8 is basically forced in this position. But it gains a tempo here. I mean, white might like to play bishop f6, but I take it with the knight. And even if white throws in this move, I could perhaps even take g7 there, but let's say queen takes d5, bishop f6. I feel like it's too easy for me to escape. I might even be able to castle there, and if bishop takes e7, play rook d to e8. So white goes all the way back here. So yeah, white has sacrificed a piece for 2 pawns, and I think they're looking to keep my king in the center, basically, and continue attacking. Now, this is not a time to be greedy and take on g2. I need to focus on getting my king to safety. I think bishop b2 was probably the best move for white. I'm looking at queen d6 here. Looking to castle. I do have to bear in mind that the a6 pawn could be weak. I could try to keep my king over here, maybe play king f8, although knight g5 makes me a little bit nervous. Yeah, I think I like queen d6 for the time being. Just looks like a good coordination move. Yeah, if ever this knight leaves the f3 square, I might think about playing knight d4 as well. Any other candidate moves I should consider here? Perhaps knight a5? Knight a5 is interesting, attacking the bishop, but kind of want my queen off the back rank, I feel. Yeah, I think I'm going to get the queen out. And just have castling on the table at any moment. Even if I have to do this and drop the a pawn, it'll be equal material, 3 pawns for a piece. There'll be plenty to play for. Okay, and white plays g3, so evidently they don't want to have to think about that. Maybe they're also trying to control the f4 square so my knight doesn't jump. Okay, and white moving very fast so far. They have as much time as they started with. Remember, we have that 10-second increment. Okay, so again, I can always castle, but bishop takes a6 will be the answer. With g3, white is weakening f3 a little bit. So I will keep that in mind. I kind of like the idea of knight a5, as I was saying. Takes the knight away from the center, so it has a little less influence, but makes a good deal of sense. b5 is kind of a radical idea to try to sacrifice a pawn to open the file, but with white's bishop controlling a1, I don't think that's best. I could play h6. h6 is perhaps constructive. Idea being to play king f8 without allowing knight g5. That may be decent. I mean, I think I would be justified in playing that here, given that white played a somewhat slow move on the previous move. But still, I would overall feel safer with my king over here. Yeah, knight a5, bishop here, though, and white's actually hitting the h7 pawn. So I might want to play h6 just for multi-purpose reasons. Yeah, definitely leaning in that direction now. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, and d4, opening up the center. Interesting. So if I take, white can take here. And after it takes, I guess he's going to take with the rook, perhaps. Also, the threat is to take and then gang up on my knight. So have to be aware of that. Yeah, very interesting move. Striving for the initiative. This player likes to attack. Okay. Yeah, d4. I didn't consider that move, but it makes a lot of sense. So I could play this knight a5 move I was referencing. I could castle, but that drops a6, as I've been discussing. Although, given that this move surprised me and that castles takes I can take with the queen and still keep an eye on this, I may want to play that. Yeah. So having that move in my back pocket could turn out to be handy here. So let me just check. If castles, d takes c5, queen takes c5, gotta look at the forcing line. Bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, rook takes d5, queen takes d5, and my knight is defending the bishop. So as long as that c6 knight isn't disturbed, even though there's a bunch of trades, that seems to work out fine. So castles, white could take here, but that gives me a bit more safety, a bit more time to organize. Yeah, I think I'm going to play that. Maybe one other line I have to consider is if castles, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, white plays c4. Trying to kick my queen, but I think I can play queen e6 there. Is all right. Queen e6 in this position, also possible, but it looks kind of weird to put myself in a pin like that. White might just move their queen away. I don't think they're going to trade with me. So, yeah, let's castle. Kind of an admission that this might be a good move by my opponent. Caught me off guard, as I was saying. Okay, so if white takes here, we'll have even material. Interesting imbalance. 3 pawns against the piece. Think about playing bishop f6 if that happens. I think I'd like to get my bishop here and oppose white's bishop. Yeah, bishop takes, a6, bishop here. If there's a trade, this rook is always lined up, but I feel like that should be all right. c4, knight db4. I feel like tactically that should be fine for me. Okay, so my opponent's thinking. I think he's followed up this piece sacrifice excellently. Yeah, you know, I was pretty skeptical of this to begin with. Okay, I'm going to take now. And we'll still see how this develops, but bishop back to b2 and especially d4 were quite good. Not sure about g3. I'm not sure about both of our moves, actually, g3, h6. Okay, and he decides to go for the pawn. All right. So I probably don't want to take because that allows queen takes a6 check. Kind of thinking about a centralization type move like rook here, perhaps. Could also dive into c3. Ooh, actually, that may be good. Knight c3. Ooh, that puts white under pressure. That's a fork. White could take on d8, take back. That catches my eye because if I can eliminate this bishop, the dark squares around white's king are super duper weak. So yeah, knight c3. White might have to take on d8. And I feel like that's already starting to work in my favor. There's an eventual queen e3, but I think I like this. Yep, knight's still defending c6 at all times. Let's go for it. I'll pre-move this capture. Yeah, I think I'm just going to take back with the rook if white does take. But the main thing is if white takes on c3 and I take with the queen, I'm going to be threatening bishop a3 followed by queen b2 mate. And yeah, I don't think white will survive on the dark squares. So more than likely, white will not want to take on c3. But it is a fork, so presumably if he's not going to take on c3, he's going to want to play rook takes d8. Yeah, one line I was calculating was, let's say rook takes d8, bishop takes b7, king takes b7. And then queen e3 from white. But I think there, if I want, I can just trade queens on e3. And then play knight e2 check and fork the king and the g3 pawn. Pick up a valuable pawn. White will have 3 versus 1 on the queen side, but it's 2 versus 2 in the center and on the king side. I think black should be playing for the win there. Looks like my opponent is having some connection issues. Just connections going in and out. Hopefully they're still there. This has been an interesting game so far. Okay, and he does take. Yeah, I am surprised by that. Because I think white is going to be ruining the day they weaken the dark squares here. Yeah, mate and 2 threat. The captures with check here don't really change anything. Yeah, I think this is actually over. I don't see how white's going to effectively defend here. It's even hard for white to give up material and defend. It's just such a massive threat. The mate and 1 threat, and then the mate and 2 as well. Yeah, I should mention I'm threatening queen a1 mate at the moment, in addition to bishop a3 check. Yeah, and playing something like rook d3, or maybe trade first and then rook d3, probably just delays, not necessarily checkmate, but delays the inevitable, because I can always play queen a1 and then go scoop up this rook on h1. But yeah, trying to move this rook to give the king running room, and having to move the rook up the board, otherwise my rook on d8 is going to control the d1 square. That seems to be about white's only option here. Okay, we'll make this trade. Okay, king b1. Now I'm just going to decide between bishop a3, as I've originally said, and also there's bishop f6, creating a queen-bishop battery on the long diagonal. That move's also good, although probably a little less direct, because white could throw the knight in the way, or, you know, knight d4 or something. Bishop a3, on the other hand, I think is pretty much lights out very soon. But I can take my time here. There's no rush. Just scanning to make sure there's no checks white can throw in. You guys might have seen my last standard game, and I was surprised by some of my opponent's moves there, and missed some stuff. So making sure to blunder check, especially at a decisive moment in the game. But nope, I think queen b2 is going to decide. Yeah, importantly, queen e5 not working. I can play knight takes e5. Yeah, I'm trying to think about where white went wrong. I mean, bishop takes c3 was the move we isolated as, and he does resign. So thanks for the game, david860. Bishop takes c3 was the move that really sunk white, but I think after knight c3, it's already pretty bad for white. I don't know if it's quite winning, because white could play rook takes d8, as we'll look at in the analysis, but kind of goes to show you when you have a weak color complex around your king, and fianchettoed bishops occupy like a special place in a castled kingside position, because they're often the best defender of the castled king, and when you have to part with that fianchettoed bishop, the squares around it almost by default become weak, because you did fianchetto, so you probably have a chain of pawns on the opposite color as that bishop, and when you trade that bishop, yeah, you can easily get done in by that color complex. So, you know, bishop takes a6, yeah, already might be a pretty big mistake right here. Knight c3, and I think white probably has to play this, and then let's say take, and try to move the queen, but I was already describing why I thought this position was pretty good for me, because if queen e3, at minimum I can do this, and then check and go pick up the g3 pawn. I feel like this is technically winning for black. White's a pretty long ways away from being able to use this majority. I have a b pawn against the 3 versus 1, which is the best pawn you could have, because it's going to stop white from creating a pass pawn for a while. I guess white could play queen e1 if this position came to pass, but there's rook d1 check, which will win the queen for a rook and a knight. Yeah, just tough. So I think bishop takes a6 was already not great for white, although it is the consistent move. Most likely, if white's going to take on a6, they should do it right here. Yeah. So keeping the tension. And also, in my shoes, for white to keep the tension and not play d takes c5, that actually makes me a lot more uncomfortable. I don't want my queen in this alignment with his rook on d1. That's the thing about tension. When you release it, even if you're playing a forcing move, a capture, or you're creating some major threat like hitting your opponent's queen, often your opponent breathes a sigh of relief because they no longer have to worry about what happens if you take in the future. So you're clarifying the situation, and you might be conceding some future edge in doing that. So yeah, I think white should take here, and it's a very interesting position. I'm not sure. It's very possible if we put the engine on this, it'll say white has enough compensation. Maybe white's even better. And I don't think I have to panic yet. I was probably going to play bishop f6 because I do feel, even without the capture on c5 yet, it makes sense to post my bishop here and try to be ready to trade the bishops if ever I get the opportunity. But yeah, kudos to david860 because he found a couple nice attacking moves. And he courageously went for the sacrifice. I mean, not easy to do, especially with the rating mismatch. Most of my opponents, I would say, play too passively when I have this big of a rating mismatch. But this player, he went for the throat and didn't quite work out. But I'd say his best move of the game was d4. Like, that was a move I did not see at all. I should have seen it. I should have been looking for alignment issues. But as soon as this was played, I started having to go to my backup plan, which was to castle queenside. So I'm going to give this a brief run through with the engine. As far as the opening, yeah, b6, kind of an offbeat way of countering this b3 Sicilian. As I said, there's a number of ways black can react. Knight c6, d6, or e6 are all fine. There's even theory with g6, g6, bishop b2. Knight f6 was a trendy line for a while. e5, knight d5, like goading white into doing this, and then black plays f6, and according to theory, black's fine here. Looks kind of like a weird line. So, yeah, against lines like that, you kind of just have to do what you're comfortable. Find a setup that you're comfortable with and go with it. Maybe, in hindsight, going for d5 would have been better here. But I'm a little hesitant to do that when white has a development lead. Like, this check looks a bit irritating. So, I think the way I played it's probably all right. Yeah. I was just honestly expecting white to play bishop d3 and, you know, I might get in d4 after that, and I was looking forward to shutting this bishop out. But we'll see what the computer has to say about knight takes d5, because maybe white has more compensation than I gave white credit for. And I think that's definitely the case after d4. h4 is interesting. Like, that's a pretty direct overture against the black king. Like saying, hey, I know you're probably going to be castling short, and I want to be ready to pawn storm you. I probably would not have played that move myself. I mean, I might have looked at d4 here as white. Yeah, probably d4 is the most likely candidate move for me, but it's interesting. I don't think this is a bad move necessarily. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Chess.com changed their layout a little bit. Now you can toggle the eval and the lines on and off. Let's do that to both. That does kind of mess up. Okay, let's just do lines. Lines only. Okay. All right, so knight c3, and I played e6. Yeah, knight f6 might be playable here, but I was just uncertain about the complications of this. Yeah, white's bishop is not on b2 yet. I think mentally I assumed white's bishop was here because I had mentioned maybe there would be some problems on this diagonal. Computer seems to be unimpressed. Yeah, probably if white plays f3, it's just a bit far-fetched and difficult to win this bishop. Or, you know, maybe they'll throw this in first and then try to play f3. But yeah, black looks to have pretty good play here. I mean, -8 eval, just off the top of my head, a move like this looks pretty good. Okay, so maybe I can play knight f6 directly here. Normally in the Sicilian, you wouldn't do this and allow white to play e5. But yeah, with the bishop here, can make an exception. So as played, still really wants me to play knight f6, but I just played d6. Yeah, computer already prefers black here. Played bishop e7. Okay, but yeah, d4. So maybe I had to give d4 a little bit more deference. I mean, e5 crossed my mind, but that's a bit of an anti-positional move. It surrenders the d5 square. Also, I'm allowing knight g5 here. I don't want to open this diagonal right towards f7. So, yeah, Engine likes a6 immediately. Looking for b5. And then I'm probably a little bit better prepared for d4 if that's played. Yeah, let's say something like this. Trade. Maybe I can play queen c7. Engine wants to play b5. Maybe goad white into some sacrifice. Although this looks pretty interesting and potentially dangerous. e5. Exploit the pin on the pawn here. Feels like bishop e7 should be a normal enough move. Yeah, and h4. So if white plays d4, again, a trade here. I can castle, or I probably would have stepped out of this alignment issue on the d file. Maybe queen b8. Normally I'd like to play queen c7 here, but it allows knight b5. That's why I would like to have the pawn on a6 if I could, but maybe queen b8, just get ready to castle. Black looks kind of cramped, but oftentimes you do start fighting back. a6, look for b5. Yeah, bishop b5 check is a problem, though. Yeah, pushing my king around. Yeah, this setup contains some venom. A little bit of venom. Yeah, I think I do need to play a6 a little bit earlier than I did. So h4, and now I play a6. White plays a4. Yeah, a4 seems like a reasonable and normal move, because otherwise I'm going to be playing b5. Okay, and here I played in the center. Knight d4 is a nice little move I didn't consider in the game. But yeah, black can often use this square. Attack the queen, attack the knight. If there's a trade, this knight doesn't have a great aggressive square to go to. Yeah, I would have to go back to a2 or b1. Yeah, I'm hitting the e4 pawn twice. That looks like a pretty nice move. And for that matter, maybe I could have thought about it here. Although if I play it here before a6, then white might jump into b5 and attack this guy a couple times. Although, yeah, e5 here. This is a better time to play e5 because there's no knight on f3 that can jump here and attack f7 with the help of the bishop. Yeah, actually, in hindsight, I much prefer this to what I did. Whoops, went too far forward. Yeah. Bishop e7. And probably white should have played d4 here, but I think I should have played knight d4 in this position versus a6. I just don't really like the look of the position if white goes d4. Although, yeah, admittedly, white could have played this more favorably a couple moves ago. So, yeah, I'm learning some stuff about this setup from this game. I guess the main thing is I should have played knight f6 early on. Didn't have to worry about e5. Bishop takes g2 looks fine. I've analyzed similar lines with this before, where you're doing it with a bishop on b7. I've actually looked at it in the c3 Sicilian, c3 b6. d4, bishop here, bishop d3, knight f6, e5. I've looked at this before, and I know the engine says black can do it in this position too. Gives a pretty favorable evaluation. But good to know for the future. Okay, so let's step forward in the game. So I got this d5 move in, and now this was the thing I was wondering about. Knight takes d5. Yeah, the engine says it's white's best try. Because having to retreat here and allowing this move does not look nice for white. This bishop's going to be out of the game for a long time. Yeah, knight e4, and I was going to play knight d5 and avoid a knight trade. I was liking my pawn structure, the fact that my knight is within striking distance of squares like this. I'd probably feel safe castling. I think it would be fine. Yeah, especially with knight f4 and stuff on the horizon. Knight here also, if I ever want to just destroy this bishop. Yeah, this would have been unpleasant for white. So, okay. He sacks. Bishop takes g7, rook g8. Bishop went back to b2. Yep, seems like a good reply for white. And then the engine approves of queen d6. And it does say white can play a little more directly in the center. Yeah, d4 here. I was wondering about that in light of the game. Because he played g3 and I played h6. So if d4 here, again, I should castle. And what if bishop takes a6? This is along the lines of what I was talking about in the game. Okay, yeah, granted I can take on g2. I guess I'm much more likely to take on g2 when I can just easily castle, or I already have castled. I was mentioning rook takes g2 here, but probably not a great idea to do this when I'm still 2 moves away at least from castling, moving my queen and castling. Makes me pretty nervous. Queen e4 is the engine's move here. Attacking the knight, maybe some discoveries on the rook on g2. Yeah. Just not a move you're going to really contemplate too seriously if you're black in this position. Likewise, I guess I could have considered knight f4, but same thing. Like, I don't think it's... Even though I gained a tempo on the queen, it's not worth going after g2. So, queen d6, g3, yeah, h6. I felt like there was a bit of a lull in the play here. Again, h6, I was trying to control g5, maybe playing around with the idea of king f8. But if I knew that d4 would be played, I think castling makes the most sense and try to just accelerate what happened in the game. White might take on a6, but I think now I like bishop f6. Yeah, computer likes it too. So key to trade that bishop around white's king. So white played d4 after that, and yeah, judging by the eval, this still looks good for black. So the engine prefers my piece and maybe the associated activity over the pawns that white's getting. Even though white does have 2 pawns and can pick up a third one here. So I was suggesting this move afterwards, but yeah, bishop f6, and I guess black's activity is the bigger factor here compared to the pawns. I could see that, yeah, because I don't know that white ever really wants to take now and allow this. Kind of seems like we're headed for something similar to the game, even though I won't have a dark square bishop. The c3 square is going to be super weak for white still. Black's kind of dominating the center. I can bring my rook over at any moment and hit his queen. But at least that would be an improvement over the game. Knight e5 is another move the computer's suggesting here. Looks pretty sharp. Yeah, I can take here or take here. Black has an advantage in either case. So as played, take here. But yeah, knight c3, and already this eval's creeping up pretty high for black. Rook takes d8 is given. Rook takes d8, and then queen c4 or bishop takes b7. Yeah, engine's giving this line, which I also gave with queen e3. Yeah, queen c4 doesn't look like much of an improvement either, because I can go pick up this pawn. Yeah, white has double isolated pawns. This should be winning for black. Yeah, so, all right. It looks like after d4, my position was better than I gave it credit for in the game. Just visually, this looks like a nice move, and I was getting a little bit nervous about this alignment. But it seems like black's defensive resources are sufficient. Again, that's what's nice about having a backup move and telling yourself early on, especially if you know the game's going to get sharp, that, hey, if need be, I always have this move. I always have this castle's move to get my king to safety. Yes, I have to shed 1 pawn, but I am already up 1 point of material, so worst case scenario, we're playing an equal material position, but my king is relatively safe. Yeah, after I landed knight c3, I think, as I said, close to winning for black. And then when we trade, definitely winning for black. Just not much for white to do here. I was mentioning like maybe rook d3, but just seems like it's delaying the inevitable. Yeah, engine already finds force mate here. I was saying at minimum I can go and pick up this rook, but also might be some bad stuff happening on the dark squares like that. Further expose white's king. Okay, so some interesting ideas here. You saw a offbeat setup from white, but one that had attacking potential. I think that takeaway about the weak color complex around the opponent's king is important. I was praising d4. Like, this move is definitely in the spirit of the sacrifice that white made, trying to open lines in the center. When your king is castled and your opponent's king, me in this case, is still in the center, usually you want to try to open lines in the center by means of a pawn break, oftentimes. And the importance of having a backup move and trying to identify a backup move early on in a position where you may be under fire. So the fact that I had castles here, it was nice to just be able to default to that. So, okay, d4, I missed that. Looks kind of strong. Looks like white's creating this threat on the knight. Let's just get the king to safety. So thanks again to david860 for the game. I'll send them the link to this analysis. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll be back again soon with another one. Bye, guys.